Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, a leader in the New Thought movement, PEN Award-winning historian, the author of The Miracle Club and the Napoleon Hill Success Course series, which includes The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim, One Simple Idea, and his latest, Secrets of Self-Mastery. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about Napoleon Hill's top 10 rules for self-mastery and success. So welcome back to the show, Mitch. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, sir. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Let's dive right into things. People can catch all of our other interviews. They can hear your backstory, Napoleon Hill, the works. Let's dive into rule number 1 of Napoleon Hill. What's a definite chief aim?
This is my absolute mantra, and I always tell people that if you take one idea from my work, if you take one idea from the work of Napoleon Hill, who's been a great inspiration to me, make it this one. You have to have one absolute focused aim in life, because focus produces power. Focus and concentration produce power. We see this all the time in nature. You can push air currents out of the way with your hand. You do all day. But if the gas of air is focused into a narrow space, it becomes as powerful as a speeding bullet. That's literally true. And that's a universal truth. So having a focus brings you psychological, psychical, intellectual, mental power in ways that can't be fully summarized. It's necessary to have an absolute passionate focus in life to which everything else is subservient. And that is a tough, tough bargain that life strikes with us, because as I often say, we all face the need to perform multiple functions in life. We're workers, we're artists, we're caregivers, we're sons, we're daughters, we're parents, we're neighbors, we're spouses. We have many roles that life requires of us, and that's never going to change. But if you scrutinize the lives of your heroes, whomever they may be, you will find that what you treasure and value in those individuals is the one thing for which they lived. For Helen Keller, it was human potential. For Nelson Mandela, it was democracy and justice. For Steve Jobs, it was creating a revolution in handheld technology and so on. This is true again and again. If you have one focus, you'll heighten your energies in ways that you cannot possibly recognize until you've reached that point. If you take nothing else from any of this work, take that, having one definite chief aim.
It's interesting because there are a couple concepts running around in my head. One is the fallacy of balance, but the second is I used to do a lot of work with kids. And with kids, if there was a sport, if there was an art, if there was something that they were really excited about, I wanted them to dive into that with everything that they had, even at the expense, forgive me, parents, of grades, because if they found one thing that they honed onto and became good at, that would spill over into all areas of their life.
Yes. And the martial artist Bruce Lee, who's a hero to me, said something that I view as a kind of extraordinary insight into human nature and performance. He said, "I don't fear the opponent who has practiced 1,000 different moves. I fear the opponent who has practiced one move 1,000 times."
Yeah.
Take wisdom from that, live with that, sit with that for a period of 6 months. Having that absolute focus is what makes you exceptional. And as you've alluded, it will spill over into different areas of your life. I always tell people who worry that a focus will make them unbalanced, or a focus will lead to their neglecting other obligations in life. One well-chosen focus can cover a lot of different bases. It may not mean that you get to where you need to go in all the predictable ways and all the mind's eye ways and all the conventional ways, but one well-chosen focus, whether it's a sport or whether it's artistic or whether it's financial or whether it's martial, whatever it may be, will spill over into other facets of life, as you've noted.
Thank you. And that means, you said the words well-chosen. So the two words that come to my mind are completely honest.
Just starkly honest. And one of the great difficulties people have in selecting an aim is their unwillingness to be honest with themselves. We repeat things to ourselves our entire lives by rote, and we think we're being honest, but very often these things are reflections of internalized peer pressure, how we want to appear to ourselves, what we think sounds virtuous, and we're plagued by these limitations even when we are within the very private confines of our own thought. It's necessary, I believe, to throw out all rote thought, all habitual thought, and ask yourself what you really want. I have a friend who's a lawyer in D.C., and he went to all kinds of fancy Ivy League law schools, and he served a fellowship at Princeton, and he thought he was going to take a corporate law job, and then he found that the hours entailed in that were just too much. So he's interested in international trade, so he took a job instead with the International Trade Commission in D.C., which settles trade disputes. Yeah. And he said to me at one point later in life, I came to realize that my leisure time is really, really important to me. He's an aficionado of science fiction and role-playing games and Renaissance fairs and stuff like that. And whether that's everybody's taste or not, it's his taste. And he knew he had to make a good living. He knew he had to meet his family obligations, but he didn't want to be on a corporate law fast track that would dominate every waking aspect of his time. And I really applauded this guy because he came down to saying, my leisure time really matters to me. My leisure time is really important to me. Now, that is not in itself a definite chief aim, but it's the kind of honesty that leads you to a definite chief aim.
It makes this next question kind of interesting because we have to thread a needle, but we all get to do this. You say, life doesn't respect halfway measures. And I'm guessing we can be full on in our law and also protect that other piece of our lives.
Absolutely. It's funny that you bring that question up because just this morning I was conversing with somebody who's the lead singer of an extraordinary rock band, a band to really watch for called Starbenders. Her name is Kimmy Shelter, and Starbenders is a band to just watch. They are going to take off just like a rocket. They are incredible. And she grokked to something that was in Secrets of Self-Mastery, which is I wrote that Revelation 3:16 notes that if you are lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth. And I think one of the meanings of that statement is that you can be for something, you can be against something. You can run hot, you can run cold. But when you're lukewarm, you're just taking up space, so to speak. You're not getting anywhere. You're not forwarding or furthering anything. You're drifting. And Kimmy pointed out to me that the first song on Starbender's new album, Love Potions, which comes out tomorrow, is exactly 3 minutes and 16 seconds.
Awesome.
And she's had other confluences with the number 316. So naturally, I suggested it as a tattoo. But I think that, that statement from Revelation 3:16, inveighing against the lukewarm, is something that people should really live with. The lukewarm never get delivered. They never bring us anywhere. That's what I mean when I say life respects no halfway measures.
When I was coming back from my last severe accident years ago, I came up with an expression. When you walk, walk. When you run, run. When you ride, ride. Be there with that activity, fully 100% committed to it with everything that you've got.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, it's so rare that we expend anywhere near the limits of our strength. Perhaps we never expend the limits of our strength. Hence, we spend our whole lives underestimating ourselves. And if you dedicate yourself to whatever the task at hand is, you discover that you are, in fact, intellectually and very often physically capable of overcoming things that you're frightened of. A lot of people experience procrastination. Procrastination, I believe, is fear, but if you throw yourself into the task, not in your mind, but in actuality, you'll discover that you're much stronger than you think you are.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that goes right to number 2, particularly when we're talking about procrastination. Rule number 2, the importance of desire.
Yes, I mean, desire is really the engine at the back of a definite chief aim. Desire is the emotional passion you feel for what you want, and it's necessary because it will get you past these periods where you experience dejection or setback or failure or temporary failure. Without emotional desire, you're going to putter out really, really quickly. You're going to run out of fuel really, really quickly. I mean, my desire to succeed as a historian of alternative spirituality is so strong that it never leaves me. It never leaves me. I'll experience physical exhaustion before I'll experience a depletion of that desire. Let that help you. Let your emotions help you.
And that means, again, that we have to be honest, because how many people have come to you and say, I want $1 million, but you drill down and it's not the $1 million that they want. It's freedom. It's ability to travel. It's more time with the family. It's something that may actually be contraindicated to their $1 million desire. And so if you're not honest, you're stopped cold in the middle of the night.
Yes, and that's a great point, because one of the reasons why we don't arrive at a really actionable aim is we harbor different and sometimes contradictory aims, like wanting $1 million, working towards $1 million, but in actuality, what we really want is the travel or the leisure time or things that we think the $1 million will help us avail ourselves of. But it's so much more, it's so critical not to confuse means with ends, means with ends. Identify the ends. Identify the ends. Then we have the intellectual capacity to think about, okay, how do I need to get there? But if you confuse means with ends, it gets all muddled.
Thank you. And when we say identify the ends, I like saying identify the emotion at the end. What is the emotional state that you're seeking? Because that's what's going to give you your key to freedom.
That's a wonderful point. And it's funny, Michael, it was a great breakthrough for me, personally speaking, when I was able to be honest with myself about the emotional thrill I experience when I'm doing media. And I got to be frank with you and your listeners, this is no time for BS. Yeah. When I'm getting recognized on the street, when somebody asks me to sign a book, put whatever label you want on it. It doesn't matter to me. Those are emotional peak experiences for me. And being frank with myself about that really came to mean a lot to me. It helped me be much more relaxed, for one thing.
Well, for myself, I know with the work that I'm doing, 1,300 shows on in, list goes on and on and on. One of my goals is to be, we'll put it out there, rich and famous, but not rich and famous so that I can have a watch, so I can have a blingy this or that. That's right. Not the deal. The deal is that to me says I am reaching a critical mass of people and I am using the biggest lever I can in the world. If I was, as I used to be, ashamed, embarrassed, or not honest about that, then I was not following the pull and call of my heart, which I believe comes from someplace deeper than ourselves and will get us anywhere if we're honest, if we're open, and we listen to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful admission. It's very important because our culture takes these admissions away from us. As soon as you make an honest admission, somebody comes along wagging their finger and talking to you about attachment or identification. These are just words. These are just words that we have a rough consensus description of. They don't get to the heart of what really motivates a creative, thinking individual, which may be very different for you than it is for me, than it is for somebody else out there on the street. But we won't get anywhere with ourselves or with other people until we throw out the catechism, throw out the spiritual vocabulary book, stop using that as a kind of call and response form of describing life, and actually look at life starting with ourselves and asking, what do I really want? It may surprise you.
Thank you. So that leaves us to throwing things out, leads us to rule number 3, leave the ruins behind.
Leave the ruins. Leave the ruins. Too often we dwell in places where we can no longer be served. We spend time in relationships, in workplaces, in friendships, in family situations that don't serve us, that are torturous to us. I did this for many, many years. I would stick around situations where I thought, if only I could make someone see something from my point of view, they would give me the thing I'm looking for. Unfortunately, pain, right. That's the thing I'm looking for. Unfortunately, that never occurs. And we lock ourselves into these patterned relationships. It is so healthful to realize that you can walk away from virtually any relationship. There may be consequences. There may be consequences emotionally. There may be consequences that spill over into other areas of your life. There may be financial consequences. I'm not denying any of that. But I'm saying that it can be profoundly liberating to at least reach the realization that you can walk away. You can walk away. Then you have to decide what it is you want, and you have to be brave about it, and you have to be sensible about it. I used to have a psychology professor who I loved, and he taught one of these massive lecture hall classes of what Psych 101 or whatever the equivalent was. And there must have been 300 kids in the class. It was a huge lecture hall session that seemed to hold every undergrad, in the incoming class. And he would announce from the podium that there might be a test or there might be a paper due, and some kids in the room would invariably let out a groan. And he would always say very calmly and very matter-of-factly, you don't have to be here. And everybody would start to look at one another like, what is he talking about? And he would say, you really don't have to be here. And I thought to myself, that's absolutely correct. Can you just remember that? Can you just sit with that? Can you just live with that? You might not want an F or an incomplete or what have you, but you have to realize the essential truth of that. And that's true in every area of life.
So the corollary of Leave the Ruins then is the importance of self-discipline.
The importance of self-discipline, because that is what's necessary in allowing you to make choices, including choices that sometimes say no to this, yes to that. I know people all the time who cling to horribly painful relationships because they don't have the discipline to say, I'm going to get out of this relationship and thereby give up the security that it gives me. Everything gives us some security, I suppose, and go towards something new and something unknown. But if you have the discipline to do that, think of the potential rewards.
Awesome. So let's go to rule number 4. And this makes me think of the old Japanese, it might be a Chinese adage as well, which is the largest nail gets hammered down. Rule number 4, be seen.
We don't have to be these gutless self-promoters, these grade grubbers, these Monday morning quarterbacks or brown nosers in order to get seen for our work. It is important that the productive things that we do in whatever setting, whether you're in the military, whether you're an artist, whether you're a student, whether you're a salesperson, whatever it is, I do think that it's helpful and necessary for the individual to allow him or herself to be seen. It's almost a corollary to asking for what you want. If you don't ask for what you want, you'll never receive it. If you don't know what you want, you won't know what to ask for. But if you don't get seen, then you won't ever marshal the evidence to receive the fruits of what you want, of what you've come around to.
That's fascinating. When I go skiing with my wife, and I admit I struggle to keep up with her, but she's a front runner. If she's having a bad day and I stay too close to her, then she throttles back. If I stay way back, then she's able to power ahead. However, if I stay way back, my heart may grow dim. It's as if somebody turned down the wick. And all of a sudden I lose strength. And you talk about this with the art of keeping your head down and what happens to people.
It's terrible. When people keep their head down in their workplace or whatever they're doing, they start to become mediocre. They start to be people who don't ask real questions. They start to be people who no one counts on. They start to sort of become these functionaries, these kind of tribal functionaries, just collecting a paycheck. And our corporate offices are just filled with these people. Someone once gave a friend of mine in audio publishing a terrible piece of advice, which years later she regretted taking. And a manager said to her, just keep your head down and do your work. That's how people function here. That's how people survive here. It was awful advice because years later she discovered that no one knew that she was really passionate about the projects that she was working on. She expressed passion once for a project and a producer said to her, wow, I've never seen you so passionate about anything. And she thought to herself, oh my God, I'm passionate about all the things I do, but I'm a stranger to my own colleagues because I took that bad advice and I kept my head down. I can't fathom worse advice.
Thank you, thank you. So that segues well to rule number 5 and what we're keeping hidden. You must meet your hidden self.
Yes, and this is really interesting. All of us walk around with this concept that I could get straight A's, I could excel, I could do better, I could get promoted, I could advance, if only, if only, if only. Those feelings are true. Those feelings are true because as we were discussing earlier, we never reach the limits of our strength. We never even begin to test the limits of our strength. So I submit to people that in a very straightforward way, even a ceremonial way, they should invite in this other self, this plus entity, this hidden self, this self who they feel is really there and exists, but they're somehow alienated from. I think that's true. And I think that might even be true in a more than metaphorical way. So I invite people, whatever your outlook on life is, whether it's spiritual, whether it's material, whether it's somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. Allow yourself the ceremony in a private way of inviting in this other self. It can really mean something. It can really mean something. Sometimes we need to give ourselves a kind of emotional ritual or ceremony. Call it a spell, call it a creativity exercise, call it whatever you want, but try it. See what transpires.
I can't think of the number of professional basketball players, is my guess, where Michael Jordan as a kid growing up, they put on the mask of Jordan. They wore the 23, or from whatever state or team, you put on that mask of that person, and you became that other self.
Yes, and I think that you can help that process by the way you dress, the way you comport yourself, your physical surroundings, your aesthetic surroundings, the company that you keep. It's sometimes called a total environment. Craft that total environment in a way that builds, dramatizes, and puts flesh on the bone of who you want to be. Be brave about it. Try it. Experiment.
I'm interested. I'm speaking with Dr. Amit Goswami, famous quantum physicist, on Monday morning.
That's brilliant.
And I'm going to talk to him about an article in the Scientific American that came out recently about multiple personalities and what it means for the universe. Because when somebody would appear as a different personality, they would literally have a different brainwave state. Part of the brain for sight may go dark, they may be blind, or it may light up with another personality. And so there is something incredibly tangible and real in the level of physics about this hidden self.
I love that you're talking to Amit Goswami, and that's going to be a great exchange because not only can he engage you, I think, in a very robust way on that question. In other words, there being this concrete material reality between personality and physics and the physical world as we understand parts of it. But Amit was one of the very first people in our culture who began to explore the connection between awareness and physics in a way that was available to the layperson. So what a discussion that's going to be.
First week we had this show, way back when. First week of recording, we hadn't even aired yet. I had both Dr. Fred Alan Wolf, and I had Dr. Amit Goswami on because I wanted to dive right down into this.
That's great. Amit is a true intellectual giant. That's really wonderful.
Yeah. So speaking about that and speaking about being a giant, before we go on to rule number 6, you climbed to top of a watchtower in Waltham and made one hell of a declaration. What did you do? What's the importance of doing that?
I came upon this Victorian age watchtower that was built on the banks of the Charles River on the border between Waltham and Weston, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. It was actually a monument that was erected in 1898 to memorialize a Viking settlement that was believed to have been established on the banks of the Charles in the Middle Ages. I was thrilled when I came upon this bizarre, wonderful Victorian age monument. And there were bars on the windows. It was blocked up to keep kids from getting inside. And I was able to sort of squirm through an opening. I climbed to the top. It was very Poe-like. It was very Gothic. And I got to the top. It was a cold, bright winter day. And I felt something swell up within me. And I made this vow that I would become a successful and widely read author, that I would become a successful and groundbreaking author of metaphysics. And I felt something so completely unified within me, emotionally, intellectually, physically. It was one of the most powerful moments of my life. And my career moved forward with great velocity from that moment forward. This was many years ago. I refer to this as an act of anarchic magic, where you just make use of spontaneity and of your own surroundings, where the only rules are having no rules whatsoever, and where the things that surround you are, in the most literal sense, your temple, your place of ritual, your decompression chamber. You find your objects within random everyday life, and your time of prayer, your liturgy, so to speak, is when you feel yourself in an emotional peak position. You were ruled by spontaneity in your spiritual life. That's what anarchic magic is. And that act typified that for me.
Woohoo! On that note, I want to get to rule number 6, but I can't resist since we're writing a book on the open-hearted warrior right now. You had Sun Tzu's central idea, and this goes along with the statement that you just made because you embodied this now in every way, which is why you're rocking it. The greatest warrior prevails without fighting.
Yes, that is the art of war in a nutshell. That is probably the greatest martial insight ever committed to expression. What Sun Tzu was referencing is this notion that if you are so fully prepared, if you are so fully integrated with your surroundings and with the natural landscape, if you are so fully informed as to who you are, what's going on around you, as to everything in your environment, you will be able to join with the generative forces of nature to see through your will without conflict, without necessary friction, without firing a single arrow, throwing a single fist, throwing a single punch. And his book, his great treatise, The Art of War, also educated the warrior as to how to conduct himself in matters of conflict, in matters of battle. But the greatest warrior, as Sun Tzu taught over and over again, is one who never had to resort to battle because his preparation and his sense of merging with his environment was such that he was part of the dominant landscape of nature.
Woohoo! Rule number 6, one must take initiative.
It is so important to make the ask, not only to know what you want, but to ask for what you want. For years, for example, I might submit an article to a magazine, and they'd say, hey, that's great, we want to use it. And I would hope, I hope they'll use it on the cover. I hope they'll really play it up. But I would never ask that as if asking it was somehow behaving like a cad or behaving like some gutless, bloodless careerist or something like that. Now, if I make the ask, they can say yes, they can say no, they can say maybe. But years would go by and I would never make the ask. And I realized I'm not asking for the placement I want. I'm not asking for the money I want. I'm not asking for the treatment I want. And then I'm all gloomy when I don't get it. But I'm not letting the other party know these are my expectations. And Michael, it's so funny. I spend so much time, as you do, dealing with inspirational, motivational philosophies. And yet sometimes these things still come to me as total revelations. I realize I was embarrassed, or I was being shy, or I was being afraid, and I just didn't make the ask. So you have to show the initiative to make the ask, not to have it pulled out of you, but for you to do it. And the other side of initiative is that initiative is simply doing what's necessary without being cajoled, without being told. That also makes you a leader. That makes you a real leader. That gives you a mantle of leadership that can't be taken away from you. It's authentic leadership, that capacity to just do what is needed without being asked to.
Thank you. It's interesting. I don't know if I shared this with you last time that I had you on or if it hadn't occurred. We have our automatic writing program, and I was making a video for that a few weeks back by a window in the house, and Jessica's recording the video. All of a sudden her jaw hits the floor and I think she's yawning. I try to keep going. Eventually it got my train of thought and I had to stop. She goes, my jaw wasn't hitting the floor. A mountain lion just jumped up behind you.
No kidding.
And we caught it on video. So it may be the only sales video ever with a rare sighting of a mountain lion. And I went into my automatic writing and I'm like, what is the symbolism? Because the waking world to me is the dream world and vice versa, like Carl Jung says. And I got stand in your power. That it is too easy as a spiritual person, as a spiritual being, as somebody who would listen to this, to have this sensitivity and to go, oh no, I get to be very balanced, which we do, balance of masculine and feminine, but we go too soft. We don't stand in our power. We don't stand in our strength. We don't ask what we want for or deserve. And that's in no one's best interest. And so I got 2020 is the year, for me at least, but for many of us, to hear our lions roar. Kind, gentle, loving, but standing in our power.
Yeah, I think that's right on. 2020 has been that very kind of year for me as well. Here we are still at the beginning of 2020, but it's become so evident to me that for all this work that I do and that I talk about, I wasn't making a bold enough ask in terms of what I wanted and what I expected. It was a huge breakthrough for me. And it's funny, people think, well, gee, I would imagine that you had that down 20 years ago. I didn't. It just dawned on me weeks ago as if a light bulb went on for the first time.
Same here. Same here. So let's go to rule number 7. One must work to reprogram one's mind.
Well, this is what's sometimes called autosuggestion or psychocybernetics or the use of affirmations, the use of mantras. I mean, we have been fed by so many messages from our surrounding environments and from ourselves that kind of have hypnotized us in some ways, in a really literal sense, into believing in self-limitations. And we just have so many really wonderful tools today, thanks in part to the miracle man of France, Emile Coué, who I'm a great admirer of, who you referenced in the introduction. Emile Coué was the French mind theorist who prescribed using the mantra day by day in every way, I am getting better and better. But what people often missed is that Coué told you there's a specific way in which you must use that mantra. And he spoke of those few moments of great relaxation just before you drift to sleep at night and just as you're coming to in the morning. Sleep researchers today call that the hypnagogic state. It's a period of unique suggestibility and flexibility in our thought. It's a period of time in which our rational defenses are down, in which we may even experience hallucinations or dreamlike states, but we have control over our cognition, and it can be a wonderful time to effectively reprogram or interject suggestions into our psyches. That's when you use your mantras. That's when you use your affirmations. That's when you use your visualizations, and stick to it. These are things to be done all the time, and it can be pleasurable. It's not a drain. It's not a drag. I use almost every period just before drifting to sleep and just as I'm waking to recite a mantra or affirmation to myself or set an intention. It's a very powerful time of day, and it goes very underused.
Is there a favorite mantra or intention that you like to set before going to sleep that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Well, some of the ones that I set are highly personal, but there's no great secret in it insofar as I might have a trait or something that I need to accomplish, or something I'm working on that's profoundly important to me, and usually it'll center on something like that.
Thank you, thank you. So there's a huge concept here, and it's a concept that runs throughout every single one of your books, which is mind as builder or mind as creator. And there's something you talk about here, which goes back to the lion, because the lion was also talking to me about discernment and discernment of the mind. What is accurate thinking?
One of the ways that you can protect yourself, and one of the ways that you can help ensure that you adhere to accurate thinking, is not just randomly sharing your goals and your most heartfelt desires with just anybody, whether it be coworkers, whether it be roommates, whether it be relatives. It's not to be secretive and it's not to be cagey. But the important thing is that you don't want to invite people who have no expertise in whatever it is you care about to give you opinions. Opinions, as Napoleon Hill used to say, are the cheapest commodities on earth. And random opining is one of the things that you want to protect yourself from. It's the greatest barrier, perhaps, to accurate thinking. You have to know that your sources are good sources.
Speaking of that, how do we protect our mind from our mind? Or put another way, what is the importance of how careful we parse and choose each and every word we say to ourselves?
It is extremely important, and I underestimate it sometimes myself. We are beings of conditioning. Yes, environment matters a great deal. Yes, we are born with certain temperamental and physical proclivities. No question about that. Mm-hmm. But we are beings of conditioning, a great deal of it self-conditioning. And the things that we repeat by rote to ourselves do take on the texture of truth in ways that I believe we really, truly do underestimate. This doesn't mean that we need to be uncritical. This doesn't mean that we need to talk to ourselves like we're children or like we're Stuart Smalley, for those viewers who remember that wonderful character from SNL. But it does mean that we need to realize that autosuggestion is real, conditioning is real, and ask yourself, what would you say to a kid? You wouldn't not correct a kid. You wouldn't not discipline a kid where necessary, but you also wouldn't denigrate a kid. If you're any kind of decent human being, don't denigrate yourself. Abide by the same rules with yourself.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And along those rules, rule number 8, one must follow the esoteric golden rule.
The esoteric golden rule relates very closely to what we were talking about. It's not only what I do to another person that matters, but every time I have a thought about another person, that is an act of self-conditioning. That is an act of reciprocity. The world that we see around us and the world that we see within are really part of one whole. In fact, you'll find that people who don't have a certain virtue, like honesty, for example, they cannot detect or see that virtue in other people. People who are corrupt see honesty in other people as weakness. It makes no impression on them whatsoever. They don't recognize it. So the world that we occupy and the world that we experience are really one and the same. So we have to be careful of the thoughts that we release about the world and about other people. Again, it's not about being childish. It's not about hiding from life's difficulties, but it's realizing that there is total reciprocity in life. So the golden rule, which sounds so familiar, which can sound so sing-song, has a deeper and more esoteric meaning than we understand. It conditions our view of the world. It conditions our view of ourselves. And it's incumbent upon us to scrutinize carefully what we think about others. Not only what we do, but also what we think.
It's interesting. I've been studying a lot about dopamine lately. It's just been, I don't know why, I go down these different rabbit holes and I want to learn everything I can. And so I'm watching my world and watching how, well, I get a rush if I go to this website. I get a rush if I eat this gummy bear. I get a, wow, how much of these things are actual chemical reactions craving more. And one of them is when we say bad things, perhaps, about other people or look for negativity in the world around us.
And it's understandable in the sense that we often think that saying bad things about other people will dilute the pain that we feel. We think we can dilute our sense of pain or difficulty by thinking or saying bad things about other people. I've not found that to be true. I've not found that to be true. In my experience, that just gets us onto a cycle of repeatedly complaining and running down other people, ourselves, our circumstances. In fact, gossip and rumor and talebearing, they make us feel weaker. Again, this doesn't mean not calling out injustice. There are times where injustice exists and it has to be called out. But when we are engaging in gossip, rumor, talebearing, just as entertainment or just as a kind of psychological or conversational exercise, it's profoundly degrading. And if you carefully observe yourself, you will even see that it's physically and energetically depleting. I have had that experience. I venture many listeners have had that experience. You go to lunch with a friend who ropes you into gossiping. After 90 minutes, you will feel like hell. And that is not imaginary. It's terribly depleting, and it degrades us. It degrades us. Gossiping must be avoided.
There's a question that comes from A Course in Miracles that I ask my clients all the time. I ask myself all the time, what would love do? And it's even what would love think? Because if we become really cognizant, aware of our feelings, we will have, like you said, that conversation. In fact, you say you become what you do not forgive. You will have that vitriol, that anger. And then if you step back, you'll go, wow, that feels really bad.
Yeah. And I realize how challenging that can be, because sometimes, look, let's face it, we feel wrath. We're human beings. We feel wrath. And when the individual feels wrath, I think the individual has to ask him or herself, as I try to ask myself, what do I really want in this situation? What do I really want? Would I like to have rapprochement with this person? Would I like to have distance from this person? Do I really want revenge? Do I really want revenge? Because you have to think carefully about that. The other person who's plaguing you, although they may seem like somebody that you really want to suck it to, they might have stories and situations in their lives that are hidden, that are unknown. They might have people who depend on them that you don't realize. I'm not saying as a foregone conclusion what place somebody should come to. And the last thing I want to do is prescribe a kind of sugary treat for somebody who feels like they're suffering. I struggle with forgiveness. I struggle with concepts of love as explored in the Course. I struggle, as I suspect there's everybody listening, with feelings of wrath that sort of swell up in me sometimes. When I'm faced with that, I ask myself, what do I really want? If I could really arrange the situation in such a way, do I want distance? Do I want retribution? Do I want rapprochement? Sometimes we're really confused because feelings of hatred are just really a polarized feeling of love in a certain sense. You know, when you get into passion, hatred, love, you know, they can really be just opposite ends of the same stick. So sometimes we want someone's attention. Sometimes we want someone to honor us, to apologize to us. We don't think we can get that, so it kind of comes out as a wish for vengeance. But there's where to start digging. Ask yourself what you really want. And if you really ask yourself that honestly, you may be surprised.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's go to rule number 9. This might be my all-time favorite at this point. Have an imaginary counsel, because it's something that I do with my automatic writing. Each and every morning, I have my boardroom, as did Napoleon Hill, and we're going to have a talk.
Yes, this is a concept from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, where he talked about having an imaginary council composed of people, maybe historical figures, maybe other people who you might admire. For him, for Napoleon Hill, it was Emerson, Lincoln, Napoleon, Elbert Hubbard, a few other kind of notable figures from the 19th and early 20th centuries. And it's different from a mastermind, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but an imaginary council is a private exercise. You enter into a dialogue with figures who you see as wise, and you ask them for their advice, you ask them for their counsel. And it could be seen as a psychological exercise that opens you up to fresh and different ways of thinking. In a certain sense, it could also be seen as another form of prayer. You're making an appeal to a greater force, a force beyond you, for insight, for information, for perspective. People do that in prayer, and that's very, very legitimate, and that can be very, very powerful. People have all kinds of prayer practices. They might pray in the Judeo-Christian sense. They might pray in a more primeval sense where they select a certain deity, or they might pray to something that's not named, or they might use the imaginary counsel technique. Whatever your perspective on life and the psyche is, you are opening yourself to different avenues of thought.
Excellent, excellent. And since we're talking about bringing in a group to be able to get other opinions that can help bring us up, then tell us about a mastermind.
The mastermind group is a vital part of Napoleon Hill's program, where it's basically a support group. You meet at regular intervals with a group of like-minded, like-tempered, like-humored, like-valued people who can mutually support one another's aims. It can be as few as just 2 people. And the idea is that you want to create a kind of safe space where you can talk about all these things that you and I have been discussing, that in such a way that you know is intelligent, mature, good-humored, mutually beneficial, so that if you need a place to share your definite chief aim with people, and you know you don't just go around sharing it with any schmo who you happen to meet, because you're not inviting cheap opining. This is something you can do with your mastermind group. You can share your definite chief aim with your mastermind partners, even if it's just one other person. And Hill said not only does that have practical benefits, but the mastermind is greater than the sum of its parts. It's like a group of marathon runners who always do better when they're in a group, like a school of fish who swim faster and more efficiently when they're in a group. It's a mysterious aspect of life. It's observed in many different settings, but in essence, you could say, to use Hill's language, that the mastermind is infinite intelligence localized. Infinite intelligence localized. It heightens the acumen, the insight, the intuition of every member of the group, so it's greater than the sum of its parts. He viewed it as a vital ingredient of his program.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And going to vital ingredients, number 10, have a PMA, positive mental attitude.
Positive mental attitude. This is my tattoo here. The term PMA was coined by, or the initials, a man named Clement Stone, who was a very conservative figure, great supporter of Napoleon Hill's, friend of Richard Nixon's. And I believe Clement was the first one who initialized positive mental attitude as PMA. But isn't it wonderful and isn't it extraordinary that the Bad Brains, this African-American Washington, D.C. based punk band, who I love, embrace this as their own? And you might look at Clement Stone and you might look at the Bad Brains and say, well, these guys have nothing in common. Well, look again. They might have greatly different attitudes in matters of politics and culture and other things. But if you sat them down and said, let's talk Napoleon Hill, let's talk Think and Grow Rich, they would have no problem. They would have no problem grooving to one another. And I'm very turned on by that. And this is what I mean when I write in my books that, call it what you will, positive thinking, new thought, mind metaphysics. It is the American creed. It unites all of us. The divisions in our country today are no joke, and they're not just going to go away. But the fact is, you could take people with radically different backgrounds and radically different worldviews, like a Clement Stone and the Bad Brains, and think this is going to be nothing but a combustible combination. But if they talk about mind metaphysics, if they talk about new thought, you will find an extraordinary commonality, not just in terms of tastes, but in terms of experiences. So I've always loved that the Bad Brains used PMA, positive mental attitude. And this is a band that has an uncompromising artistic integrity and a tremendous amount of street credibility. So anybody who thinks that new thought or positive thinking is just the domain of corporate hacks or just the domain of prosperity ministers who smile too widely, look again. There are so many artists, including artists who really occupy a kind of pioneering, fringe-like place in the culture that moves the culture into new directions. They're into the very things that we're talking about. There's no cultural style that you have to adhere to. Make it your own. So for me, the Bad Brains' use of PMA with their lightning bolt became a tattoo because I just felt it so captured the aesthetic and the drive and the integrity that they brought to that principle and that I wish to bring to that principle.
Do they know you have that tattoo?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I've never met them. I love them and I followed them, and if they ever happen upon my work, I'd be thrilled. But I don't know the answer to that. Maybe in a future show I'll be able to tell you.
Very, very cool. Is there one tool that you would recommend or Napoleon Hill would recommend to cultivate a PMA?
Yes. One tool that I've always loved is this. When you're faced with a problem, whatever that problem is, you almost always have greater intellectual resources that you can bring to bear on it than that you have augured, that you have understood. And I always say to people that when you're faced with a problem, you probably have multiple possibilities to address that problem, to fix that problem, to resolve that problem than you have understood. We get very emotional, we get very frightened very quickly when we're facing problems. At an appropriate time of day, you need to sit down and you need to list at least 3 possibilities that will get you out of that problem. The great mind-body teacher, Moshe Feldenkrais, said you should be able to list at least 3 solutions to any problem. You absolutely should, and possibly many more. And it might sound like an elementary exercise. It might sound like an overly familiar exercise. But I always tell people, profundity reveals itself in application. Profundity reveals itself in application. You cannot understand the depth of an exercise or a principle or an approach until you make a real-time application of it. If it sounds trite, if it sounds elementary, that's only because you haven't used it. Don't be a cynic. Don't just accept a hand-me-down definition. When you're faced with a problem, whatever it is, whether it's financial, whether it's geographical, whatever it is, large, small, sit down and start to enumerate solutions. And that act itself is an act of PMA, because not only are you being practical, but you're expanding your sense of what is veritably and realistically possible. You have greater resources than you know. I vow that as a promise.
Woohoo! What's the importance of a personal code?
Well, a personal code is like a set of ethical guardrails. When you are participating in a spirituality of attainment, which is really what I'm describing and which is really what I'm all about, it's also, I think, profoundly important that you must have a sense of ethics. You must stand for something. That could come from religion, that could come from classical philosophy, or that could be something that you come to yourself. It could be something that is exemplified or personified by a character from myth, or by a figure from a movie, or by a figure from a novel. But it is profoundly and necessarily important that you have a definite sense of what you stand for. You know, people always ask me, "What's your ethics? What's your ethical outlook?" My ethical outlook is one of nonviolence, by which I don't mean desisting from physical self-defense, but I mean not doing anything that would violate another individual's movement towards his or her own sense of self-potential. So I don't want to do anything that would stymie or that would denigrate another community or another individual in a way that would narrow or proscribe their own wish for self-expression, their own wish for self-potential. If I've done that, I've violated my own deepest ethic.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We've covered 10 or more today. We're going to wrap things up here shortly, get into a brief meditation. But what in the world is cosmic habit force?
Oh, cosmic habit force is something I love. I'm writing about that in a new collection of Napoleon Hill's work called The Wisdom of Napoleon Hill. After Napoleon Hill wrote his two really widely known books, which is The Law of Success and Think and Grow Rich, in 1940, in a book called The Master Key to Riches, he coined this idea of cosmic habit force, and it is this. Hill made the case that nature maintains itself through detectable, orderly cycles, the ebb and flow of the tides, the rotation of the planets, the rotation of the seasons, and so on. And we can visibly see and understand how nature replicates, sustains, maintains itself through these orderly cycles. We may be the only existent beings within this particular physical sphere that are capable of choosing, of selecting their own cycles. And when you choose and select your own cycles, through all the things that we've been talking about, the selection of a definite chief aim, the exercise of initiative, leaving the ruins or leaving cruel or unsupportive people, all these things, you place yourself within a generative flow of natural laws. When you cultivate habits that are healthful, that are productive, that bear fruit, that are generative in the most realistic sense, you are engaging in what Hill called cosmic habit force. You are electing to enter the stream of nature's maintenance and creation. And in so doing, you are guaranteed to be delivered to a fruitful place. It may not be the same place that you have in your mind's eye, but it's an absolute guarantee that barring some extraordinary countervailing measure, and we live in a dynamic world, so sometimes there are countervailing measures, but barring that, you, the individual, can enter into and merge with a set of natural laws that facilitate the building of this sphere in which we live, and he called that cosmic habit force. It's extremely powerful.
Awesome, awesome. And lastly, then I want to send people to be able to get your book. What's the importance of enthusiasm? Woohoo!
Right. Enthusiasm is the magic elixir of life. It's what makes everything work. It's what drives us forward. It's why it's so important to select a definite chief aim for which you feel passion. And Emerson said famously, nothing great has ever been accomplished without enthusiasm. Can anybody challenge that statement? Would anybody challenge that statement? But it's also cautionary. Because when you don't feel enthusiasm for something, you're going to bottom out. You're going to be mediocre. So I really want to counsel people that if you don't feel enthusiasm for your job, for example, I'm not saying that you can make a change tomorrow. I'm not saying that you should go in and quit right now. But what I am saying is that can form the basis for what your goal is this year. Because if you're doing something for which you don't feel enthusiasm that's a guarantee of mediocrity. You must watch for that.
Thank you, Mitch. This is maybe my all-time favorite with you now, because it was just wow, 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 as we went through this today. So I can't thank you enough.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Would you mind, and if your people are driving down the road, do this afterwards, but would you mind leading us in a brief meditation, anything of your calling?
I'd be happy to. Those of us who aren't in traffic or driving or otherwise engaged, let's close our eyes. Take a few deep breaths together. Now, we live in a world where there's tremendous creativity, there is tremendous generativity, but we also live in a world and we occupy communities where there's also friction. It may be that in some regards, friction is the price of creativity. Life can be a polarity, and there can be coexistent and, in fact, necessarily must be coexistent forces playing out simultaneously. So I would ask you, if you have an area in life where there is friction, maybe friction with another person, or with a group of people, or with an institution, ask yourself in a completely fresh and deeply honest way, what do you want from this situation? Do you want to experience the friction? Are you perhaps enjoying the push and pull and the friction? Without judging that, ask yourself whether that may be true, whether the friction is something that you're looking for, even indulging in. Or it could be that the friction is something that you want respite from. You want there to be peace. You want to move away from it. Or perhaps you want there to be rapprochement. You want to be able to authentically extend an olive branch to someone, or have that person extend an olive branch back to you. Someone for whom you have very hard feelings might also be someone who you have attraction to, or sympathy for, or some other seemingly opposite polarized attitude. Places where we feel passion, our emotions can gravitate back and forth. There may be a situation where you feel you want justice done, or you want retribution, or you even feel wrath. Again, I ask you to probe that. Do you really want revenge? Do you really want retribution? Or do you want to be understood? Do you want to be seen? Friction is an inevitable part of life. It creates fire, it creates warmth. It can also wear us down. So ask yourself, in those areas or in one particular area right now where you feel friction, what do you really want? Allow yourself to experience that without prejudice, without precondition. And within the space of this meditation, I'm now going to pause with you for a few moments so that you can reflect upon an area of friction in a new way. And let's all do this together, just for a few moments. And now let's take a few breaths together. And slowly open our eyes and come back together. All right.
I love you, Mitch. This has been awesome.
Likewise, back at you. Back at you. Yeah. Thank you, man.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So where can people go to find your over-the-top enthusiastic in your own way, Mitch, beautiful book, Secrets of Self-Mastery, and to find out more?
Well, Secrets of Self-Mastery is out right now. I'm very proud of that book. It's a relatively concise, but I think there you go, densely packed.
Love it, love it, love it.
It's a hardcover and it has no dust jacket. It's a paper overboard hardcover, so it's really nice and sturdy. And I'm very proud of that book. It's sturdy within and sturdy without. So Secrets of Self-Mastery is what I'm most psyched about right now. Lots of new things coming down the pike. My website is mitchhorowitz.com. I'm on Twitter at Mitch Horowitz, and I'm on Instagram at Mitch Horowitz23, at Mitch Horowitz23. And I'm new to Instagram, so I'm really enjoying it there, and I welcome people to join me.
Well, friend me on Instagram. I'm relatively new there together, so or as well, so we'll grow together.
By all means, yeah. Pleasure. And I love hearing from Inspire Nation listeners. I've said it before. Your listeners, I believe, are just the most sensitive, most intelligent people in the motivational space that exists within digital media. Every question I get, every comment I get from an Inspire Nation listener through email, and my email is on my website, I'm always taken by the depth and intelligence of it. So there's always a special place in my heart for your listeners.
So I never expected to be asking this on air. I'm supposed to ask the any last words of wisdom, but since you love our listeners so much, the question that we keep getting on our YouTube feed, you have a beautiful shrine behind you, have what looks like a candle,
yes.
And you have Sith above you, if I have that
yes.
right.
Yes.
But there's a character with horns behind
yes.
you on your shrine. Who is that and what does he mean to you?
Oh, of course. Well, strictly speaking, that particular bust is the figure Loki from Nordic mythology. And I bought that in Memphis, Tennessee and brought it back home. But it is an archetype of the figure of Satan or Lucifer, of which I have a very different and very independent perspective on, different from what you find within much of conventional or traditional culture. I write about this in a lot of articles on Medium, and I think within the Western mindset, our idea of the satanic reflects a conventional and a very handed-down misunderstanding of the satanic as the maleficent or the violent or the malevolent. I see Satan as the great rebel, as the great romantic, as the great anti-hero who moves humanity forward, as did Prometheus, as did Eve when she accepted the apple from the snake. I have a much different and more productive and I think historically defensible perspective on Satan from an esoteric perspective that's valid, but that's not often heard within the conventional structure of our culture. I invite your listeners to go to medium.com, where I have lots of articles on this subject that I think they will find illuminating.
Thank you, thank you. And to me, we live in a time, this is not a bad thing. This is shifting us, helping us come on board. But we certainly live in the time of the anti-hero, helping to certainly shake up the status quo.
Amen. And no hand-me-down definitions. You know, we can't just look to the past for how we use our language. We can't generalize. We have to rediscover myths for ourselves, but also rediscover them with historical integrity. And that's what I'm attempting to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Any last words of wisdom you want to share?
Only words of wisdom I want to share is verify everything. Be completely open. Be ethical. Be reciprocal, but verify everything. Be open. We are here to be generative and to create.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the secret of self-mastery, and begin thinking and growing rich and magnifying your life in every way possible today. And shine bright. Woohoo!
Right on. Thank you. Thanks,
awesome,
man.
awesome,
Really
awesome again, Mitch.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, man. This was great.
I think my interviews with Mitch Horowitz just keep getting better and better. Check out more beautiful interviews here. Click below to subscribe and click on the bell icon to be notified of our upcoming lives every Tuesday night and of our premieres every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. Love you guys so much. Put your comments below. Shine bright.